Well, let's talk more about disinformation in this election season. We're joined by Leah Wright Rigueur. She's professor of public policy at Harvard University and an ABC News contributor. So, Leah, may I ask you first, we heard Rachel say, look, there's always been disinformation to some extent in the campaign. This time, in this day and age, as we experienced in 2016, it seems more intense, targeting not just Latinos, but African-American communities, really all of our families. We all know somebody who's eating it up. So how and why is this happening, and how big a threat is it?
So it's a huge threat, and it's something that we should all be concerned about. And let me give you a little bit of context behind this. You're absolutely right to say that this is the disinformation and misinformation campaigns, along with voter depression campaigns, have been a steady part of the American political diet for generations, right? This is, in fact, one of the impetuses for the Voting Rights Act, the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. So it's basically designed, this law that's designed to make elections free and fair in a democratic nation. One of the things that happens most recently in 2013 is that the Voting Rights Act is essentially dismantled. And so 2016 is the first election that we have without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act. But that means that marginalized communities, vulnerable populations don't have the full protection and the rights that are inherent within the Voting Rights Act. And so we see this in terms of the proliferation of misinformation and disinformation. We also see accusations of electoral fraud, which are designed to intimidate people, along with, say, things like the closing of polling stations, very long lines. All of these things are designed to keep turnout down in order to discredit and take away the rights of, again, marginalized communities and populations.
Dangerous and corrosive, as you say. I want to play for you a couple of robocalls that went out to tens of thousands of minority voters in states right across the Midwest, falsely claiming that voting by mail would give creditors and the police your information for outstanding warrants and debts. Take a listen.
Mail-in voting sounds great, but did you know that if you vote by mail, your personal information will be part of a public database that will be used by police departments to track down old warrants and be used by credit card companies to collect outstanding debts? The CDC is even pushing to use records from mail-in voting to track people for mandatory vaccines.
Well, I mean, that's just shocking to listen to. Is it true? And is there any way, if not, as I expect it's not, is there any way to hold people who are doing that accountable?
Absolutely. So what you just heard was illegal. You cannot do that. Even without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act, you cannot do that. That is electoral intimidation and it's electoral fraud. What's really important right now is, one, to hold people accountable. So to try and find out who is kind of disseminating this kind of information so that they can be prosecuted so that they can be held accountable, but also to combat that information. And this is why there are a number of organizations across multiple technological platforms that are designed really to bring real information to people, to bring real fact. And so we've seen this, particularly in social media, across platforms which have voting true and false information that is designed to combat this kind of inequity.
And we got to get the good information out there. We've also learned since 2016 about coordinated efforts to suppress African-American voters in 2016 after all the struggle for the franchise, after all the bloodshed and the passion that was done to achieve that. So what kind of an impact now are these campaigns that try to roll back black Americans from voting? How much are they having?
So you have to understand that part of these efforts are to depress what's called depressed turnout. Because when African Americans, part of the power of the African American vote is that they vote collectively. So they vote as a bloc, and they overwhelmingly vote for Democratic candidates. If they don't vote as a bloc or they don't come out in huge numbers, then the Democratic candidate often loses, right? So these things are tied together. So this is why we're seeing this kind of effect. One thing that we should pay attention to, or actually two areas that we should pay attention to, how much effect is this having on African Americans who are rejecting the Democratic Party, and then how much effect is this having on African Americans, turning them away from politics in general? Because those are the two things that are going to impact the election more generally, particularly among black men.
Great analysis there. Leah Wright Rigueur, thanks very much for joining us on this important issue.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.